You ever walk into your shop expecting to do a light sanding and a final coat of finish, but instead...
That looks like dog.
Yeah, we'll get back to that in a minute. But first, let's see how we got here. Customer sent me a message a while back asking if I could build him a box, and of course I said, what do you need? So he goes on to explain that he keeps his coffee filters in a cardboard box on the counter, and he sent me this picture. I just need a simple wooden box, like 2x6x6, to keep these filters in. So of course I'm thinking, well, we can do something a little better than that, and I asked maybe if he'd be open to something a little more than just a box. He said, sure, do your thing. So after a little work in Fusion 360, I presented him with a rendering, and he said he was cool with that, so here we are. I have this pile of red oak that's been here for a long time, and their kitchen cabinets happen to be red oak, so we agreed that that was what we were going to make it out of. The problem I realized as I started to pick through the wood is that I may have used all the straight pieces up in the past, and all that was left were not exactly grade A stuff. I called through the pile of dog legs and hockey sticks for the best pieces I could find and proceeded to get them as flat as I could on the joiner before I moved over to the planer and milled everything down to a 1/2 inch thickness. I still feel like this new blade guard is totally in my way, but, you know, the dust collection was really good, so I'm going to give it a shot and see how it goes.
All right, with the top panel and the clamps, we can turn our focus over to the sides and the drawer boxes. I'm going to do a 3-sided grain wrap. I didn't actually have a board long enough to get a full 4-side wrap, and the back's going to be up against the wall, so nobody's going to see it anyway. So we use this piece and this piece to get our box made, and then we've got 3 pieces here I can make our drawer box. So we just need to get these cut down to length, get some miters on the ends, dados for our drawer bottom and the bottom of the box, and then we can get these glued on.
After I figured out which pieces would work for the drawer and which ones were for the boxes, I took them over to the table saw and ripped everything down to the final width. I used the crosscut sled that I built in the last video to cut everything down to its final length, making sure I kept the parts in the correct order so that the grain wrap would wrap all the way around the box in one continuous pattern.
All right, before I cut my miters, the first thing I need to do is put a sacrificial fence on here. This isn't the blade I actually built this sled with, and I do change blades back and forth, so the kerf's a little bit different, and it's not going to line up perfectly with this edge. So what I want to do is tape this on. I'll make a cut through this, and then that'll give me a good reference point of where the blade's actually going to be to line up my pieces.
With a fresh kerf cut in the sacrificial fence, I can just line everything up with the upper corner directly on the edge of that kerf, and then I know the blade's going to run right down the edge of the board and everything's going to be exactly the right size. At this point, you want to make sure that you've cut all the pieces that are supposed to be the same length before you move the stop block. That way you end up with a good, perfect square at the end.
All right, with all these pieces mitered, now I can come back in. I'm going to use a piece of 1/2 inch plywood for the bottom of this because nobody's ever going to see it. And come back in and put a rabbet on all but the front face of the box, and I'll show you why here in a bit.
This is where I should probably get my dado blades out and set up a quick stack, but, you know, honestly, I'm too lazy to do that, and I just keep moving the fence over until I get the dado the width that I need it. This method works great when you don't have too many pieces to cut, but in this case, I probably should have just got the dado stack out and cut it.
All right, I got the rabbet cut in all 3 sides, and now I can show you why I didn't put it in the front. This is actually going to be the front face of the drawer, so as this slides in and out, the plan is that that miter is going to let it set back in so that it looks like a box with no drawer in it until you pull it open. I'm going to go ahead and sand the inside of these, and we'll get everything glued up and come back and make the bottom for this later.
It's always best to think ahead on things like this because it's much easier to sand all this down now than it is once the box is actually built and you're trying to reach down inside and hand sand it all. Now for the drawer bottom, I can just measure where the dado comes through the miter, and I'll subtract about 1/16 of an inch from both directions just to make sure it fits nice without binding.
All right, drawer box looks good, test fit looks okay, so I'm just going to use the old blue tape method on this instead of using clamps. So I'll lay this all out and use my table saw fence to keep things straight. Get some tape on here, and then we'll take it over and glue it up.
When you're doing this, you want to make sure your edges are tight up against your straight edge and that your ends of your boards aren't overlapping each other, so when you get the tape on there, it gets a nice tight pull without tearing the tape off. Now, since I was assembling the entire box to make sure it came out square, I had to really pay attention that I didn't glue the front face of the drawer into the box at this point. With the last side taped up, I checked everything for square, and then, you know, why not? It's probably a good time to check and see if the drawer actually fits inside the box, right?
All right, so the glue's pretty much dry on our box. I don't want to take it out of the tape just yet, though. I'm actually just going to measure for the bottom and get the bottom piece cut and glued in here so it can sit overnight, and then we'll have everything pretty well dried so we can get back to work on it in the morning.
Cut the bottom panel out and sanded it before gluing it in, and then added some clamps with a little bit of pressure just to make sure that the outer edge didn't have any gaps in it. Once the clamps were in place, I left it to dry overnight. Once all the tape came off in the morning, you could see most of the corners were pretty much perfect, and some still had a little bit of a gap, which looks much worse than it really is when you shove it into a camera and zoom in on it. A quick way to make that look a lot better is just to simply roll a screwdriver or something round like that at a low angle and just kind of push that edge back together. Once you sand it, it'll look perfect. I need to cut some dados in the drawer box, and learning from the rabbits on the last one, I actually pulled out the dado stack and made this a lot easier on myself. For something this small, I didn't want to add a big clunky metal drawer slide, so I'm just going to make some out of wood. So this dado is actually going to ride on a little block of wood that I'll glue to the inside of the box, and that'll just keep the drawer sliding in and out without sitting on the bottom of it. Now here I'm demonstrating why you always want to stand slightly off to the side of the blade when you're cutting something, and I'm not just doing this because I'm stupid. I'm just showing you how not to use your table saw, honestly.
Just need to get these sanded down smooth, and then we'll figure out what our height is in here and get those glued in. Might even put some nails in those just to hold it a little bit tighter.
If you're still here at this point, hopefully you're learning something from this video, or you're at least slightly entertained. If you are, how about going down there and hitting that thumbs up button for me? And if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. Now, if you're not enjoying the video, you can always get down in the comments and, you know, leave me a message and tell me I suck. Either way, appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching. I ran the top edge of the drawer face through the joiner just to give me a little bit of clearance so it doesn't rub against the top when you open and close the drawer. Then I lined everything up off the bottom of the box, drilled some holes, and put some screws in to hold the face to the box itself. Now we can get back to the top panel. I can pull it out of the clamps, take it over to the sander and get it smooth, and then we'll run it through the table saw and get it down to its final dimensions.
Now, since this is getting a coffee pot set on it, and they're a little concerned about spills, I'm actually going to put a piece of laminate on top of this. So if you really like the look of red oak, look away.
Cut out a piece of laminate a little bit bigger than the top and then brushed on some contact cement on both pieces. Once that tacked up, I put the two pieces together and rolled it out flat with a laminate roller. I let the adhesive set up for a little while, and then I took it over to the router and ran about a 1/4 inch chamfer around the upper edge just to give it a little bit of detail to the top panel. Again, just to make everything easier, I sanded the outside of the box before I actually glued the top down. Then I went back with masking tape and covered everything up so that any glue squeeze out wouldn't actually stain the wood on the outside of the box. I added a little glue to the top of the box and then lined everything back up with the masking tape, took some measurements, and then clamped everything down. Once that was done, I installed the little walnut handle that I had made earlier to the face of the drawer. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the next morning my good intentions of putting the tape on to keep the glue from staining the wood ended up costing me a lot of time. I had to go back through and scrape and pick all that tape out of the joint that actually had just been glued in place. So maybe next time I'll pull the tape off before the glue actually dries up. It all worked out in the end, and after some final hand sanding, I got everything cleaned up and was ready to go put some finish on. Since this is going to sit on the counter right next to the sink and under a coffee pot, I decided I needed a little bit more protection, but I still wanted to get that hand rub look, so I put on 2 coats of wipe-on polyurethane and let that sit overnight. This gets us back to where we started this video.
That looks terrible. Wow. Okay. Start over.
I used a different polyurethane than what I normally do, and it honestly went on looking like a thick coat of plastic, so I went back to 120 grit and just started sanding most of it right back off.
Alright, I got everything sanded down. Still a pretty decent layer of poly on there, so I should be able to put maybe one more coat on if I can get it to lay down a little bit better. So basically just gonna go back, I'm gonna thin this out and give it another shot.
I realized that this brand of polyurethane was just thicker than what I was used to using, and so I cut it down about 50-50 with some mineral spirits, and that made it more the consistency of water. It really wiped on a lot better and got a much better finish without the heavy buildup from before. I left it sit over the weekend just to make sure the polyurethane had fully cured, and then I went back over it with an extra fine Scotch-Brite pad and sanded everything down to the final finish. Then I came back with one more coat of hard wax over top of that just for a little bit more protection. Once the wax dried, I buffed it out with a microfiber, and then I went back and added some little rubber feet to keep it up off the countertop. For a final touch, I added a little felt to the inside of the drawer box, and then it was all ready to go over to the customer's house and take its place on the counter, replacing that classy cardboard box. Hopefully, they think it's a little bit better. That's going to do it for this one, and as always, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.